There's a particular kind of quiet that's hard to explain. You wake up, check your phone, scroll for a few minutes, not because you're interested, just because it fills the space. Music plays in the background, but it doesn't move you. Conversations happen, but they don't stay with you. Everything is visible, but nothing is tactile. The world has lost its sharpness. You're not exactly sad. You're not okay either. When we experience this blankness, our first instinct is often to panic. We treat it like a broken engine or a dead battery, something that needs to be jumped back into life. But if we look at this through the lens of the nervous system, a different picture emerges. When a house experiences a power surge that the wires can't handle, the circuit breaker flips. The lights go out. The house becomes dark and silent. It isn't because the house is broken, it's because the system is trying to prevent a fire. When your system becomes overwhelmed by too muchness, too much demand, too much noise, too much unprocessed pain, it decides that feeling is a luxury it can no longer afford. To keep you functioning, to keep you going to work and surviving, it mutes the emotional spectrum. It creates a buffer between your consciousness and your sensitivity. In this light, the numbness isn't a flaw, it's a sanctuary. It is your body's way of ensuring that you don't burn out entirely. People expect emotional numbness to arrive with something dramatic, a loss, a breakdown, a clear before and after. But more often, it comes through accumulation. Too many things needing your attention, too little space to process them, too many moments where you had to stay functional instead of honest. When reacting deeply stopped being useful, your system learned to keep things manageable. Emotions didn't disappear, they just stopped reaching full volume. In daily life, this can look deceptively normal. People around you might see someone composed, reliable, even strong. You might still be productive, still responsible, still capable. Inside, though, joy doesn't quite land, and sadness doesn't fully arrive either. Rest doesn't feel restoring. You may feel slightly removed from your own life, like you're present without being fully involved. This often leads to a subtle, persistent pressure to be more. We live in a culture that prizes vibrancy, passion, and being present. When we can't meet those expectations, we layer a second level of stress over the initial numbness, the stress of feeling bad about not feeling. We ask ourselves, why can't I just be happy? Why am I so empty? There is a tendency to view this period of life as empty space, as lost time, but nature suggests otherwise.
A garden in winter looks sad. The vibrant colors are gone, the growth has stopped, and there is a profound stillness. But under the surface, the soil is resting. It is recovering from the intensity of the bloom and the heat of the sun. The winter is not a failure of the garden. It is the necessary condition for any future spring. If you are in a season of numbness, perhaps you are simply in your own winter. The frost on the glass isn't there to lock you out. It is there to keep the warmth inside, however little there may be, until the system feels safe enough to thaw. Recognition is the only requirement. Recognizing that you are here, that you are protected, and that the nothingness is actually a very crowded, very busy kind of silence. There is a profound pressure to fix this. People tell you to go outside, to try new things, to force a spark back into your life. But that pressure often only makes the shielding thicker. It becomes another demand for a system that is already overloaded. What if, for a moment, you didn't try to feel more? What if you allowed the numbness to be there without judging it? You aren't a robot, and you aren't empty. You are a person whose circuit breaker has flipped because the world was a bit too much for a bit too long. There is no deadline for when the lights have to come back on. Perhaps the numbness isn't a wall keeping you out of your life. Perhaps it's a blanket wrapped around a part of you that just needs to be left alone for a while. It usually returns the same way it left, gradually, and in response to safety. Not excitement, not motivation, safety.
You might notice yourself gravitating towards smaller things. This is a valid orientation. There's a quiet power in choosing the low-resolution life for a while. You might find yourself wanting to follow a very simple, repetitive routine, eating the same food, walking the same path, wearing the same comfortable clothes. Instead of seeing this as being stuck, it can be seen as a way of telling your nervous system, there are no surprises here. It is safe to lower the guard. Rather than searching for big emotions, one might shift towards simple sensory grounding, not to feel better, but simply to feel something physical. The weight of a heavy blanket, the specific temperature of a cup of tea against the palms, the texture of a stone. These are small data points for a system that has forgotten what it's like to be connected to the world. There is also a power in allowing yourself to be unproductive emotionally. You don't have to have an opinion on everything. You don't have to have a reaction to every piece of news. You are allowed to be a spectator in your own life for a while. When we stop demanding that the feelings return, the system often begins to feel a subtle shift. By accepting the numbness as a legitimate protective state, we remove the threat of our own self-judgment. We stop fighting the circuit breaker and start looking at the wiring with a bit more compassion. When the system senses less demand, less pressure to perform, less expectation to react correctly, it starts loosening its grip, often before you consciously notice. You may notice moments where nothing feels heavy, small stretches of calm without effort, a slight return of interest that comes and goes, less urgency to understand yourself. These aren't setbacks or false starts. They're signs that capacity is rebuilding. Neutrality often comes before emotion. Calm often comes before joy. You don't thaw something frozen by yelling at it. You place it somewhere warm and let time do its work. And the thaw doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't arrive with a fanfare or a sudden burst of color. It usually begins with a very small, very quiet return to the body. A momentary catch in the throat during a song. A brief, fleeting sense of warmth when a pet sits nearby. When the winter outside finally eases, when the pressure slowly lifts, the wires inside no longer need to overload. One by one, the lights begin to come back on. Not all at once, not dramatically, just enough to feel the warmth returning to the rooms you forgot could feel alive. That's often how feeling comes back too. Quietly, gradually, without being forced. This may not be an ending yet. It may simply be a pause between holding on and warming up again. When pressure eases, feeling usually finds its way back, quietly and in its own time.